Hey, afternoon, everyone. It's really good to be here, and thanks to Lindsay and the crew for the opportunity to speak. When you're speaking last at a conference, it's sometimes viewed as, a bit of a poison chalice. A graveyard shift is something that is sometimes bandied about. I am assured that it's not the graveyard shift, that it is actually the headline slot. So this is the Aerosmith of the ALH conference you're about to see. But also, mindful that they're setting up the drinks right now. And I'm sure many of you will have played a lot of cricket in your lives. You're probably aware of the golden rule in cricket that a quick match is a good match. So I'm going to try and fly through this. It's really kind of headline stuff. If you have any questions, please do ask them at the end, but I'll be here for a beer as well, so do rock up and have a chat if you'd like. So at Off-Highway Research, we, not wishing to pick on a colleague's slip of the tongue, we're not intelligence forecasting, although that would be quite interesting in the British political climate. Intelligence would appear to be going down. We're market intelligence, we try and forecast, and we're very much in the earth-moving space. So I appreciate that these equipment types are not necessarily going to be completely in your wheelhouse. But what I would say is that hopefully the trends that I'm talking about will resonate with your businesses and what you're trying to do. And also what I'm trying to do is talk about what's driving things at the moment in the construction equipment and construction world. So hopefully there'll be some good takeaways from this and maybe some ideas about how you can apply a lot of the data that's out there to your businesses and kind of improve your forecasting and your planning. So North America, a picture in terms of the equipment market, in terms of sales of equipment that we saw all over the world, really. Of course, things dipped when COVID hit and then rebounded very, very strongly. In this part of the world, it was particularly driven by residential construction, and so that's all about compact equipment. You can have whatever definition you like. For the purposes of this, it's really the types of equipment weighing 6 metric tons or less. The larger equipment, I feel, will kind of come through in time, and of course, that's helped a lot by infrastructure spending. So I'm just going to kind of dive into that quickly. But before I get there, let's have a look at the market. So this is the number of machines sold in North America over, as you can see, quite a long time frame. So it's a cyclical market, right? You see the ups and downs. And of course, right there in the middle of the slide is what happened with the global financial crisis. It took a little while after that for things to get moving again, but the market came back to quite good volumes by sort of the mid-2010s. A few bumps in the road, but things really, really took off very steeply after that. And then you can see the rebound I was talking about in that final red column. Our forecast for this year is actually for a little bit more growth, so the market will go from last year's record high in volume terms to another record high. We're pretty confident of that. But further out, what we're forecasting is a relatively soft landing. Yes, it will dip, but you can see that the volumes will stay historically high. Of course, forecasting is not the same as knowing, so what I want to do really is try and impress on you what has underpinned that and what might change to either sort of make that forecast come true or change things. And this is a problem, we're trying to forecast 5 years out. If you sit here today and think back 5 years of all the things that have happened in the world, you couldn't possibly have predicted so many of them that have had such profound impacts on our life. So I'm not saying this is right. I'm not saying this absolutely will come true. What I'm saying is this is what we think, standing here now today. Things will change, and that will affect the forecast. So again, that's something I would say to you, whatever you're doing in terms of planning or forecasting, be flexible, review, keep an eye on the data that's important to your business. The way the market is structured in North America, again, over quite a long time frame, has changed. If you go back to the 90s, the very popular type of construction equipment was the skid steer loader. And that made up about 1/3 of the market. So a very high volume product, but not really that much other construction equipment that was small. Most of the other equipment types were relatively large, even if only a little bit larger, like the backhoe loader or the tractor loader backhoe. What we've seen over time is that other types of compact equipment particularly have gained traction. The mini excavator has really sort of come through, particularly in the last couple of years. And you've also seen compact track loaders come in and replace the skid steer loader in a lot of applications. And I think if you appreciate that they're very, very similar types of equipment, it's just a different type of undercarriage. So having that tracked undercarriage that doesn't damage the ground, can work in softer ground conditions, even though it makes the machine so much more expensive, has been a real boon. And that has squeezed out the skid steer loader. But when you get over to this side of the chart in our forecast period, compared to back in the early 90s when compact machines were a third of the market, we're seeing compact machines being about 2/3 of the market now and going forward. So why is that? We'll come on to that, but just a quick point I want to make, which ties in with this, is production and sales. So here, the red columns you see are the number of machines that are manufactured here in North America, obviously mostly in the USA, but a few in Canada. And then in gray are the number of machines that are sold in this region. So go back to the 1990s, things were more or less in balance. Of course, you had some machines coming in and you have some exports, but in sort of a trade balance sense, it was fairly equal. Then as you move forward, you see that gap just get wider and wider and wider, particularly in the last 10 years. What has caused that is this shift in equipment preferences. A lot of the mini excavators that are sold actually anywhere in the world are manufactured in Japan, so a lot of them are those imports. And even compact track loaders, although it's pretty much quintessentially an American product, you have two major producers in Kubota and Takeuchi that for the moment produce in Japan and import them. But both manufacturers have announced a few things that will change that and bring production here to the US. So we're going to come back to that trade balance in a minute, but just to talk about the drivers of equipment sales. This is Census Bureau data of the value of construction put in place in billions of dollars. And here you kind of see the cycle. This is total construction. And again, as I was saying, there was an uptick in equipment sales, pretty quickly after the pandemic struck. You can kind of see why, because these sort of 2020, 2021 columns really shoot up and take the markets, the value of construction to unprecedented levels in dollar terms. If you map that against construction equipment sales, so again, the red line is the value of construction on the left-hand scale, and then the gray line is equipment. You do see a bit of a correlation. Generally what you see is that the peak in equipment sales comes a little bit before the peak in construction activity comes, and likewise the troughs. So sales are a bit of a leading indicator. But there are clearly other factors at play. There was a bit of a dip in 2016, which we really ascribed to a bit of uncertainty ahead of the election that year. And of course, in 2020, although construction activity was really shooting ahead, a lot of manufacturing had shut down and took a long time to get back up and running. And really, ever since then, equipment sales have really been chasing the activity that's out there. And we're, of course, all aware of the supply chain issues in the world, and, of course, in this market, shipping issues, because a lot of these machines come in across the ocean. That process of catching up just doesn't really seem to be getting there. Many of the people that we speak to in the industry on the OEM side and the distribution side say, look, in any given market, we could be selling 5 or 10% more machines. We could have done that last year, and we could have done that this year. We just need the machines to sell. And similarly, if you place an order today with your local dealer, you could easily be waiting a year or more for delivery of that machine. So it really illustrates how the equipment market is struggling to catch up. And you're probably seeing that in things like prices of used equipment, which right now are absolutely sky high. So yeah, the equipment sales can be volatile, and clearly, as I've just explained, other factors can influence that. But if you look at what's happening in construction, and therefore if you take a view of what's going to happen in construction spending, you can see this effect of the peaks and troughs kind of leading what happens in construction. So it's all about, the buying pattern is people just having the confidence. What's my pipeline of work? Am I good for a year or two? Yes, I'll invest. Does it look like it's turning down? Yeah, all right, take a step back. The other point I want to make about equipment markets is around construction equipment population. And this is quite a difficult one. We have a few clients that kind of approach us, and they come from the automotive world. And what lucky people they are, because every sale is registered, all the scrappage is registered. You know it by brand, you almost know it by model number. So people have a very, very clear idea of how many cars are on the road, how many trucks are on the road. Of course, you don't get that in construction equipment. So what we do is, our research is what are the annual sales, and we apply a model to that, which is, okay, how long do these machines last? If it's a compact excavator, 6-7 years. If it's a big dump truck, maybe 15 years. So we plug that in, and we get an estimate, or a model, I should say, of the population. And the thing is that because these machines are very long-lived, what happens to the population is kind of almost counter-cyclical, really, to what happens for construction equipment. And it's important because this population takes a while to change. So you have these situations where, construction activity can be growing, but people just can't get enough machines, so the population is still falling. So that's why you get these little pushes, these little pulls and pushes in equipment sales. So it is kind of quite a useful thing to keep an eye on, because it's about how much work have I got to do, how many machines have I got to do it, and that's really sort of fundamental when you're on the ground. I'm not going to repeat these points. Obviously, you get the presentations afterwards, so they're just there for your benefits to kind of have some notes. I think, yes, the population is high, and obviously with what sales are doing, it's growing, but it would seem that possibly the population is a little bit too small for the amount of construction activity out there. So it can have a sort of a slightly strange effect on what happens in sales. The problem, though, is that when activity does fall away and you've got this population that's built up really quite high, is you've got obviously lots of problems with utilization in rental fleets. If you're trying to sell equipment, all this young equipment that's around and is working is a real barrier to your sales. So I think from a commercial point of view, if you're in those sort of areas, that's quite an important thing to kind of have a handle on, sort of, again, going forward and in your planning. And just to illustrate what I was saying about how the population movement and the sales movement can really be somewhat counter-cyclical and kind of be moving in different directions. Again, this period in the early 2010s, you had equipment sales growing really quite quickly, but although they were growing, the population was still falling. So you do get quite odd effects when you start looking at this. So just to kind of dive into it a bit, I want to break out the different components of construction a little bit. And again, this is Census Bureau information. The biggest part of construction in this part of the world is most of the time residential building, as shown by this red line. And this is monthly data, so you kind of see the seasonality in this sort of kind of heart attack effect that you get. And then you see a little sort of pause for a month or two at the start of lockdowns when, we weren't really sure what was going to happen in the world in terms of economic activity. And then really after that, I don't like to use jargon, but what us economists say, it just went absolutely nuts. It really did shoot off at a kind of a rate that was almost unprecedented. So I think you can appreciate why these supply chain issues are such a problem when activity is doing that, and when people just can't get machines. So I'm just going to dive into that a little bit more just to kind of separate things out. That's the monthly data, and the trend line is sort of the annual moving average underneath that. And then when you kind of compare that against what happens with compact equipment sales, you do see, by and large, they track fairly closely. You don't have so much of this lag between what happens in equipment sales and what happens in activity. So the point there is that with these machine types, it does seem to move very quickly, that the market seems to react quite quickly when it can, obviously. And so moving forward, I think we all recognize that some sort of downturn is coming in residential construction. It is going to foreshadow a correction in the compact equipment market. Equally, when you look at population, because these machines are somewhat short-lived, you do get a bit of a better correlation between what the population is and what's happening with activity. So yeah, less evidence of this sort of chasing effect. The population is very high, really, because of all those compact track loaders that we've had. And as I said before, that can be a problem. With compact equipment, yes, it can adjust relatively quickly, and quite a lot of these machines are in rental fleets. Obviously, part of the theory about rental fleets is that with these very big chains, that they do have disposal routes that can be outside of the territory. So maybe the population can adjust quite quickly, and you don't have this pool of machines sitting around doing nothing. To what extent that's possible is probably a question for some of you rather than me. But that's the idea, and it is probably quite helpful for kind of getting the park of machines to the right size for the activity that's out there. So fundamentally, if you're thinking about compact equipment sales, really whatever's going to happen in the compact equipment market depends entirely on what you think the outlook for residential construction is. Unfortunately, I wasn't here this morning, but I believe Scott had some forthright words to say on that. So I would encourage you to heed whatever warnings he had. We tend not to forecast the construction activity itself, but we look at permits. It's just dropped off the legend here, but this green line is the number of building permits issued, shown on this right-hand scale. And so you can see in the run rate this year that it has very much leveled off. And if you speak to anyone who's kind of in the mortgage business, these days they really are staring at their shoes about the amount of business they're not doing. So you would certainly expect a fall off in residential construction, and therefore the sales of compact equipment will probably follow that. I think the only thing that I would say about that, and the bit that's very difficult to disentangle, is because you've got such long lead times and such red-hot demand for equipment, it does really remain to be seen what happens with all these orders that are placed and are going to take a year to fulfill. Maybe that equipment is actually needed, and certainly I would feel at the moment there's probably not quite enough equipment in the marketplace to meet the need. But you also have this worry, again, about a bit of a bubble building up, that maybe dealers have over-ordered. They just kind of order a little bit more than they need, and they know they're going to get allocation, and it's going to come back down to what they actually need. And maybe they've just been too bullish anyway. So what happens with those orders that are placed, whether they end up being cancelled or transferred to something else or whatever, is an interesting point, and is one of the things that makes forecasting in this area at this moment quite difficult. So that's what I mean when I said at the start, keep an eye on the data that's important, and just kind of be prepared to think flexibly, and don't kind of get locked into whatever forecast or plan that you have just because you made it 6 months ago and 6 months ago it looked right. I think we're in a situation here that could change quite quickly, and it could have quite profound effects for this market. A word on production, and going back to that slide I showed earlier about the imbalance and sort of the trade deficit, if you will, between sales and production. Again, we've lost a little bit on the legend here, but what we have is the production of compact equipment that's coming out of existing plants, historically shown in red, and then into this sort of forecast period from 22 onwards. obviously those existing plant outputs will probably fall with falling sales of equipment, and how much is obviously a matter for debate. But what is happening is that there is quite a lot of new manufacturing capacity in these equipment types coming into North America. Okay, you've got, since John Deere and Hitachi have parted company, you've now got Wacker Neuson about to come online to manufacture compact excavators for John Deere. So that is, previously Hitachi were making them in Japan, painting them John Deere colors and bringing them in. Now those mini excavators are going to be made up the road in Wisconsin by Wacker Neuson in their plant there. In the compact track loader space, you have Takeuchi that bought a factory down in South Carolina that used to be owned by Kobelco, that they very soon will start turning compact track loaders out of. And Kubota has also gone on record in a slightly vaguer way, but they are going to bring production of things like compact track loaders here to the US in Kansas, I believe. So it is a very good news story, I would say, for American manufacturing, in that, you know, there's this reshoring effect or onshoring, and a real sort of vote of confidence in the long-term strength of the markets and of manufacturing here in the US. So the other area I'm going to look at is infrastructure, which, because we're very focused on the earth-moving world, is very core. I appreciate that for some of you, non-residential building might be quite an important area. Unfortunately, I can't really comment on that directly because we don't particularly cover the types of equipment that are used very heavily in non-residential construction. But hopefully it's something that you can maybe take away, and maybe it gives you another angle to look at. So this is infrastructure. It's, you know, construction, right? It's a cyclical industry. Show me the cycle. You know, you've got the seasonality, of course, but there aren't really many peaks in that. You know, where are the ups and downs? It's just kind of trending upwards, and it seems fairly steady. Yeah, you know, I just can't see a cycle there, and the trend seems fairly positive over time. So, of course, you know, the driver of equipment sales is steady. Of course, equipment sales are just going to be steady, aren't they? They're just gently going to trend upwards. They absolutely do not. You kind of get these effects of it. It kind of pushes and pulls, and, you know, even though the infrastructure market shown here in red might be sort of fairly steady in sort of the late 2010s, some quite strange things were happening in the market for heavy equipment. Of course, in 2020, sales did slow down for the obvious reasons that we all understand. So, yeah, okay, that's explainable. But, you know, you do struggle really to find a correlation between that. And I think the point here is that it's not just, okay, what's happening in construction? Yes, we need more machines. You know, machines are bought by humans, and, you know, they have, they've got to be confident. You know, they're either feeling optimistic or pessimistic. There are other factors outside just the pure driver about what's the financing. And like I said, in 2016, we saw a very clear effect of uncertainty ahead of the election. And the thing with this type of equipment, so much more than compact equipment, is because it's long-lived. If you're not feeling so good about making a big-ticket purchase one year, you can just go, yeah, okay, I'll pass and I'll see how I feel in 12 months. So, yeah, it's volatile, it's hard to forecast, and it's sometimes not exactly clear what the drivers are until after the event. But I would say the market is kind of coming back to what I would describe as a natural level after the disruption of 2020, and also sort of certain amount of catching up that's been going on. Again, you know, because of this long-lived nature of the machines, it is important to look at the population. And again, yes, you get this sort of very strange effect when the population is falling, even though activity is coming up, and these very weird effects that are related to the life of equipment, and then, you know, therefore trace back to these things about what people are doing about aging their fleets or whatever. So it can be sort of quite a confusing thing to look at because they just don't line up very well. But you kind of see this situation here where we are, where the infrastructure market has reached quite a good peak, notwithstanding the fact that there's obviously infrastructure spending coming, and it will lift the amount that's spent on infrastructure in this country. I don't particularly see it causing a peak. So there's the fact that within the infrastructure bill, a lot of what was announced would have happened anyway. There's the fact that infrastructure is a very broad definition, and it's not a huge, well, a large amount of it is pouring concrete and steel, but a lot of it is not. A lot of it is a much broader definition of infrastructure. And the other point is that although you do have extra spending, it's spread out over quite a few years. So the actual effect, what's added on to infrastructure spending on a year-by-year basis, is actually relatively small in terms of this market. And you probably don't need that many more machines to do it. You probably need some more, and it will lift sales. But I think more than anything, the infrastructure bill kind of provides this confidence and this stability. So, you know, you would expect a little bit of growth and hopefully no fall off in heavy equipment sales. But, you know, we do live in quite difficult times. So the outlook in a nutshell, residential market for sure is due for a correction. How deep it is, how long it lasts is one to ask Scott about, but it's coming. And it's just a case of keeping your eyes on the data, understanding what it means for your business, and trying to adapt to it. And like I say, not being married to the forecast that you made 6 months ago, to kind of be nimble wherever you can. The manufacturing side of that, as I said, even though there's a bit of a correction coming, it is quite a good news story, and there are obviously opportunities in that depending on which part of the business you're in. You know, heavy equipment, perhaps some upside in 23, 24, but I would stress, you know, stability tending to a little bit of an uptick. We don't see anything that's going to cause a spike, and as we've seen in history, it's not just about how much activity is there. There's a bit more, I'm going to sell some more machines. With interest rates going up, obviously the cost of financing equipment is a bit of a worry. And not only that, obviously the price increases that OEMs are trying to add, that will have an effect. So we're more optimistic on heavy equipment, I would say, but we're not doing somersaults about it. So yeah, that's rattled through the PowerPoint as quickly as I'm able. I'm very happy to take questions now, or also to take a beer.
Does anyone have any questions for Chris? I think they're ready for beers, Chris, but thank you.
My pleasure, thank you. Cheers.